All right, we are live. It looks like there's only... Doesn't look like there's really anybody. Well... It says current user 1, and I don't know if that's myself. Okay. Well, it looks like all audio is coming through, so I guess I'll just get started. Huh. Shoot, I wonder if it's the time or what made this not work for people. Huh. Okay, well, we got a couple people. I don't know what YouTube is on about then. It's showing that I have it's showing that I have one viewer, which is obviously not right. So, all right. Well, if you hear some clicking and stuff, it's because I woke up this morning with a really sore throat. I think it's just allergies. But we'll go ahead and get into this. I've talked about Allomancy before, but I know that's one of the biggest requests people have is to do breakdown videos of different systems. Mistborn is one of the ones I know the best because that's where I formed a lot of... Oh, hang on. There we go. Allomancy is one of the ones I know the best because that's part of where a lot of my intense study of magic systems really started. So it's just a good place for me to begin a lot of things. So this is going to be kind of a test session. One, to try out a new format, see what people think of the content, and so on and so forth. So, with that, let's go ahead and get in. Oh, hey, Lucas. Glad you could make it. So, as I started breaking this down, I kind of talked about it in the lead up to this, but there ended up being a lot that I kind of want to talk about. The real focus of a lot of this is going to be explaining the magic systems, but not just to explain the magic system. It's because I think this is going to be a great place for us to actually take and start putting it into more concrete examples for you guys to follow and understand, hopefully. And for me to better understand and spot deficiencies where they might be. So with that, this first section that we're gonna go over, and hopefully we will get through all of it in the time that we have, is going to be what the system is and what the system does. Then after that, the other parts that I want to get into with these kinds of breakdowns is talking about how it's used, and not just how it's used in the story, especially if people use it in creative or new ways, but also how the author uses it in their story. Oh, I see. Okay. How about now? Any echo now? I thought I caught all of those. Sometimes when I have stuff plugged in, I have a couple audio captures going on accidentally. That's what happened last time we had really bad echo. So please let me know if the echo is toned down. So, not going to start all the way over. Quick recap though, we're going to be doing Allomancy. There's kind of 4 main sections I think these breakdowns are going to happen in. First one is what the system is, what it does. That's going to be your more standard breakdown. The second part is going to be how they use it. Like I said, it's not just how the users use it, but how the author uses it to connect with and direct things in the story. Yeah, the echo didn't fix itself somehow. I had an extra audio capture going on. So I muted that, and that should have that. I'm glad that took care of the echo. And then after the how they used it, the last part is going to be why it works that way. So there, I'm gonna get into some of the testing, and a lot of all of this is going to be very subjective because I'm not the person who created the system, but we are going to talk through like why certain restrictions and certain stuff allowed and helped manage different situations. And then last of all is just going to be us playing around with the system and seeing what happens if we tinker with different settings and how we can adjust different settings. And that one will probably be the most useful for all of you guys and seeing how changing stuff will let you do different things in your magic systems. So, with all of that out of the way, as I got into it, it looks like a lot. So, I'm going to cover what I can, still leave room for questions at the end. Today, we're probably just going to get through what the system is and what it does. Now, I have some similar stuff on this in my video where I break down the structure of Allomancy, so there is going to be some duplication there, but that's okay. So first off, when I want to talk about what the system is and what it does, I want to get into the heart of the system, which, by the way, this is just Allomancy, not all of the metallic arts, and it's just Allomancy in the first trilogy, not the entire series, because there's enough that changes that's worth making that distinction. And if people really like these videos, I can do a lot more of these because this is fun for me. But the seed crystal is the core part of it. Again, I'm not Brandon Sanderson, so I can't tell you what his seed crystal is. But listening to interviews and other kinds of stuff, the best guess that I have is I know one of the things he focused on with this is he wanted it to be, he built it as a system that would be useful to thieves and spies. So if I had to guess, I would say that the seed crystal was something like magic that is used primarily by assassins, spies, and thieves, where different metals are consumed to produce different effects. That is my best guess at what the seed crystal for this magic system was. That's definitely what the seed crystal is to me as a user, right? Especially the part of the metals are consumed to produce different effects. Now, in some other places, I've talked about how to refine your seed crystal, and there's a couple of key parts to this. For one, it's very specific, right? It really gets into it. It talks about, without explicitly saying the system is unique, because it talks about what makes this system unique. The consumption of metals that's honestly the main part. That's also highly thematic, which is another thing that can make seed crystals more potent. It also talks about how the magic is useful, how it's used, because we know that these magic effects are going to be useful to assassins, spies, and thieves, and that gives us a lot of information right there and starts ideas churning. So it's thematic, it's specific, it tells us what is useful, it tells us what it is different. So even if this isn't what Sanderson started with, this is a decent seed crystal that you could run off with and just by changing a couple of words go into a very different type of magic system. So if, for example, you changed metals are consumed to something like metals are worn or metals are embedded in the skin or something like that. Or tattoos with metal ink. That's something where you could make the difference. Or maybe it's not metals, it's something else. So there's, shoot, I can't remember the series. Is it like Symphony of Magic or something like that? I'm blanking on everything, but there the people use its fruits. So it's the fruit juice that powers the magic. So it becomes a thing of, but if I remember right, it's having the fruit juice in your mouth, or it's because if you swallow it, starts being digested quickly. So that's where it's less effective. Anyway, that's one where they just replaced metal is consumed to produce magic effects to fruits are consumed to produce magical effects. And I'm already jumping to part 4 when I promised myself I would focus, but hey, here we are. So that's the seed crystal. The other part about how a system works is going to be The other things I want to talk about, there's going to be the magic effects, which we're going to get into. Those are very well known, but we'll go through them anyway. We have the rules and patterns of the magic system, which are important. Then we have the type of power progression. We've got the blueprint and the variables that I want to go over. And then we have whether it functions as magic or tech in the story/world. So if we dig into rules and patterns, I am not going in the order of the 7 stages at all, because this is something you figure out mostly in like stage 4 and 6 when you're doing definition and restriction. Oh yeah, I'll talk about restrictions too. So rules and patterns are fairly simple, and I talk about this in the structure where everything is broke down into these quadrants. So every effect is either an internal effect and an external effect, and either a pushing effect or a pulling effect. Now, with that, all metals are there's the pure metal, and then there's an alloy of the metal. So any pure metal that produces a allomantic effect, there is an alloy of that metal that also produces an allomantic effect. So the alloys are all related to push effects. The pure metals are all related to pull effects. So it is iron pulling and steel pushing, because steel is a alloy of iron. So that's an example there. And when I include all of this, because I wasn't smart enough to get the screen share set up in advance, and I'm not going to do it now, but you can check the Allomancy Coppermind. Well, hang on. Let me see if I can do this real quick. I'm betting I can. Okay, we're not going to do that. That's just going to be confusing, and I don't want to mess with resizing. So sorry about that brief blip. But again, if you've seen the other video, it all works out. And also those quadrants are broken down into different types of effects. So I'm just going to do this real quick. So in, push, pull, pull, push, and and again, if I had been thinking, I could have already had this done, but here we are. Okay, so that is the structure that I have in the videos. You have the 4 types of physical, mental, enhancement, and temporal. Each of those has an external row, an internal row, a push row, and a pull row. So your effects are either external and pushing, external and pulling, internal and pushing, or internal and pulling. So that is the structure that all of the effects go into. Then there is the subset, which are the god metals, which that's just a set of 4. Those haven't really been broken down into pushing and pulling. There's really just the god metal and then the god metal alloy. So those are an exception, which you can have exceptions. So yeah, internal, external, push, pull, 4 categories. Went through all of that. Newtonian physics and natural laws are a very big part of this system. Is everything that Sanderson does, he plays on Newtonian physics and STEM science information to violate it as little as possible. You have to violate it some because you're doing magic. right? But even then, he tries not to. He gets into the part where, like, yes, it's a conservation of energy of sorts, because this energy is a different type of energy that is bound up in the metals that just specific people are able to tap. But most notably, that happens with the iron pulling and steel pushing. So that's the whole thing of if I push on something that is lighter than me, it's the thing that moves. If I push on something that's heavier than me, I'm the one that moves, because Newtonian is equal and opposite. So by me pushing on it, it is pushing back at me, and whichever one is smaller and has the least amount of stability and inertia, that's going to be the one that moves. So, Newtonian physics, natural laws. The last aspect of the rules and patterns he has in here is how the metal is burned, how it's used, and burning is the term he used. So the base term is just burning, and that's just consuming it at a normal, natural rate. The other option is flaring, which increases. I don't remember if it's exponential or not, but it has a drastically increased burn rate, but also a large increase in the magnitude of the magical effect that is produced. So if you're using steel to push on something and you flare it, you push twice as hard or 3 times as hard. I don't know that the quantities were ever explicitly stated in the books, but that's the idea. So it's faster burn rate for higher energy output. So those are all of the rules and patterns that are in Allomancy as it stands. Now, for the types of power / progression curves, this is an interesting one because it's actually relatively flat. There is no growth of magical power as somebody becomes more experienced with the magic system. It is almost entirely skill based. Or more specifically, what it is there's small deviations depending on how strong your bloodline is, like how strong your gift is in that. But beyond that, beyond your starting point, there's no power curve that doesn't come from skill. So it makes one allomancer more powerful than another allomancer is entirely training and their ability to use it skillfully, which is interesting. A lot of times we have it so that you grow and your power goes up. This one, that does not happen. You have what you have. There are a couple of things that can boost that, but those are more external forces boosting it rather than you having any actual growth. One exception is when Vin turns into a divinity effectively, but again, that's her transitioning to a new level, at which point that power level is flat. So there's weird things you can do to get boosts, but when you have the boost, you're just operating at a new point rather than seeing growth. All right. Then we have the magical effects, which most of you are probably familiar with. In the first 3 books, so with the quadrants I showed you, there's space for 16 metals. And then 4 more, potentially 6 more, if you include the god metals and depending on where you look in the series. But in the first trilogy, in the first book, we only know about 10 of them, and then the 11th is a big deal. So people only know about 11-ish, and that 11th one is people are like, oh, we don't know if this is real or not. But by the end of book 3, they know about 14. So we're going to go through the ones that they know. They know all of the physical metals. So they know iron, which is physical, external pulling, and that allows them to pull nearby bits of metal straight towards them. Then there is steel, which is physical, external, and pushing. Then tin, which is our pure metal, is internal and pulling, and that increases the senses. The idea behind that is you're pulling in extra sensory input. And then pewter is the internal pushing, where you are pushing your internal limits, and that increases physical abilities. Likewise, they know all four of the mental metals. Zinc is the external pulling, which is where you inflame or incite other people's emotions. You intensify their emotions. Brass is the alloy, so that is the external pushing metal, where you are pushing against their emotions and you're tamping them down. You have copper, which is the internal pulling metal, which is hiding allomantic pulses. Because when people are burning it, it sends out energy ripples, basically, that bronze can detect. So copper, they hide the pulses. I think of it as they basically pull the pulses into themselves so that others can't detect it. And then bronze is the inverse, as you can reach out and you can hear and sense the allomantic impulses. Here is where things start to shift. Of the temporal metals, in Book 1, they only know about gold, which is the internal pulling metal. And gold reveals mirages or illusions of your past self. By the end of Book 3, they also know about electrum, which is the alloy, meaning it is the internal pushing metal. And that also works in like mirages / illusions that show versions of your future, versions of you in the future. None of the enhancement metals were understood in Book 1. The Canton of Inquisition knew about some of these, but general Allomancy practitioners did not. That's something else I forgot to mention in the patterns. Well, that's more into restrictions, so never mind. I'll come back to that. But you have aluminum, the pure metal, which is the enhancement internal pulling metal, which wipes out your allomantic reserves. Not super useful by itself, but it's something that they use to wipe out the reserves of other Mistborn. Duralumin is the alloy, and that is the enhancement internal pushing metal, which will take whatever metal you are burning and I guess just flash burns it. On the wiki, they say it enhances the current metal burned. It does more than that. It takes basically whatever reserves you have and burns all of them in an instant and gives you the entire output of all of that is burned in that instant. So it gives you huge pulses of power, but will like instantly deplete your reserves of that metal. So Vin uses that with steel pushing to basically launch herself like half a mile or a mile through the air, because she just burns steel and pewter and duralumin and launches herself a massive distance. One second. Okay, I bumped a button I shouldn't have. So those are all of the base metals that we know by the end of the first trilogies. We know 8, 9, 10. That's 12. So I did something wrong. So by the end, I think they know 15, not 14. Because that's when we get into the god metals. We have atium, which is one of the most prized metals. That comes from ruin. It doesn't really have pushing or pulling, but that reveals the future of things around you. Most notably, Mistborn use it to see what people are going to do and where attacks are coming from so that they can effortlessly evade them. So then the alloy is, I believe it's an alloy, well, no, it says is that the pulling? It's not clear what I'm looking at. That might be the pulling. atium may be the pushing or the pulling. I don't know. It doesn't say. But then you have malatium, which was the 11th metal in Book 1 that lets you see another person's past. So it's like gold, except on somebody else. So those are the two god metals. The ones that people don't really know about is lerasium. That's another god metal that turns people into a Mistborn. It is what it does. And when the people who take lerasium, they are at the peak. They're the first generation, so to speak. So their magic is strongest. And then over the generations, it slowly dies out. then there's a bunch of other metals that we don't know anything about. But those are the 15 that are covered in the core trilogy. So, I always feel weird when I do video that recaps stuff like this because I'm like, well, people could just Google it and go to the wiki page. But uh, hopefully it's helpful to have it explained through here. So, yeah. Hey, Stone Free. Glad you're here. Cool. We're getting a number of people. So, let's see. Yeah, the use of physics was like one of the main things that drew it in, and that was one of the things that really set Sanderson apart, and still is a big part of it. And that's why when people will try and do hard rational systems, they don't fully get why his stuff works. And part of that is because it's not just the system that is rational, as he makes the system a rational part of our rational world. So then it hypes it up to new levels. So, that's where we are with all of that. That's what it can do. And now we get into some new stuff that you can't just look up. So now I want to talk about the various restrictions and limitations that exist in the system. Now, I'm going to be talking about some terms that I don't think I have covered in any of my YouTube videos. They're things that I talk about when I present at conferences and stuff, but I don't know that I have covered them as much on YouTube. I lose track of what I have and have not covered, which I haven't figured out a good way to keep track of all of that. But with restrictions, I think there's four categories and then 2 types. So your categories are the 4 C's, which I know I've mentioned before. Previously, they were like 3 C's, but you have capability restrictions, which is just restricting what people can do. You have cost restrictions, where something has to be paid, sacrificed, or given in order to perform the magic. You have consequence restrictions, which are things that are lost or paid or suffered as a direct result of using the magic. And then you have countermeasures, which is those are ways of dealing with or diminishing the efficacy of the magic. Costs and consequences are very close to one another. I do think they are worth differentiating for a couple of reasons, but those are the categories. Then the 2 types are that I have identified so far, because all of this stuff is always evolving as I learn more and work through more. But they are absolute restrictions and conditional restrictions, and they're exactly what they sound like. Absolute restrictions, there's no exceptions. It applies universally across the magic system. Conditional restrictions apply when they apply. If you are ever using the statement of people can't do blank unless, then it's a conditional, because that unless tells you what the condition is that lets them do the thing. So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the capability restrictions in Allomancy. So one of the big ones is that iron and steel own the iron pulling and steel pushing only affect metal. It's not generic telekinesis. It only lets you push and pull on metal and strong bits of metal. And then as we go on, it's also that it is metal that doesn't have large amounts of investiture in it. So that's why metal mines are harder to manipulate, is there's investiture imbued in them, which makes them harder to influence. But that was part of the workaround so that they weren't just throwing people and stones and doing whatever they wanted with telekinesis. It's only metal. Now, also, it is only directly towards or directly away from the user. I can't lift a piece of metal and just move it straight laterally like this. Can't do it. Now, I can push and pull and do weird things where, like, I push at the top and I pull on the bottom and then start it spinning if I do timed pulses, but like moving it laterally, can't do. It's always from your center of mass, not just like from your torso or from your hand. Always from your center of mass. Those are absolute restrictions. That is true no matter who it is and what they're doing. It's just that's how it works. Also, the magic is restricted by physics, which we mentioned, but this is a conditional restriction because the most notable exception is actually not iron pushing and steel push and pulling, or whatever, iron pulling, steel pushing, uh, or conservation of energy or conservation of mass, because he pseudo has that, like, well, you're converting one into the other. No, the exception is tin, which is the one that lets you enhance your senses. And again, this is something you can find Sanderson talking about in um, interviews and sessions and stuff like that. But if it was just enhancing your senses and increasing how much sensory input you pulled in, tin wouldn't let you see through the mist the way that it does in the books. Because the mist, the reason mist is hard to see through is it's refracting the light. So if you intensified it, it would be like switching your high beams on in a fog bank. It's just going to reflect more light back at you, not make it easier to see through the mist. Now, that is an exception that he covers through the series, but that is an exception to the physics. There is also a strange one with I hesitate to even talk about this. It's an odd one about the steel pushing and pulling. Um, because when it's kind of too esoteric. It's really getting into some nitpicky stuff about physics, which I'm probably wrong about anyway. So I'm gonna push past that. So the restriction based on physics is a conditional restriction. Um, Now, when it comes to emotional manipulation, you can't feel what others are feeling. You manipulate emotions blindly. You kind of just stare at them and then you can push on them or you can pull on them and you can kind of control how hard you push and pull, but you don't know what it's actually doing to them. And that is another absolute restriction is you're pushing and pulling, you're not feeling. Then with the temporal metals, with gold and electrum, that's visual only. As far as I can tell, there might be a little bit of mental knowledge or it could be interpretation. It's not entirely clear, but there's no exceptions. That's all it does. It's not something you can talk to. It doesn't give you past information. It's just an image of yourself. Now, another absolute restriction is that when you have allomantic powers, you either have access to one of the metals or all of the metals. That's it. That is absolute. No way around that. You're either a misting who can use one specific metal, or you are a mistborn who can use all of the metals. Then lastly, it's connected to noble blood, which is an absolute. So the only source of allomancy is lerasium, followed by the bloodline of people who have consumed lerasium. Um, there might be some exceptions about that, about becoming preservation and like picking up one of the shards, but that's nebulous enough that I consider that outside allomancy itself and gets more into the realm of the greater magic system of the shards, which we don't really know enough about to say for sure. So, because even pulling in the mist seems to be something that only allomancers can do. Um, yeah. Okay. So, okay. No. I'm gonna have to change that. It's not just noble blood. That is conditional. Where you get it from is conditionally noble blood. The other way is to have preservation push it upon you, or have one of the shards bestow it upon you. Um, so there you go. I was wrong, and I should make a note of that. But I have it recorded. It's fine. So those are the restrictions we have on capabilities. Next, we have the restrictions based on cost. So, for one, you have to consume metal must be burned and consumed in order to produce magical effect. This is a weird thing too, because if we're just talking about allomancy, that's true and it's absolute. But if we're including the shards and ascension and apotheosis, Then it becomes conditional because the other condition is the mist, where the mist can fuel these effects. Again, we're getting into whether that's technically part of allomancy or not. So I kind of peg that one as more conditional than anything. But if you are using metal, the metal must be in your body. You can't just touch the metal and use its effects. Not with allomancy. You have to have consumed it, or I think they can work it if it is like embedded in their skin. They might be able to burn it, but that's not clear. Everybody we see eats it and then digests it in order to perform it, and that is an absolute thing as far as we know. Another interesting cost: in order to be able to do the magic, you have to go through significant trauma in order to snap and awaken your power. And that seems universal. Now, that snapping may be it depends on how you look at it with Elend. You can say that maybe you don't have to snap if you consume the lerasium. It's hard to say because maybe the consumption of lerasium itself is a trauma. And Elend, when he got the lerasium to get his allomantic powers, he was dying. So that alone could have been enough to snap him, that he was given the metal after he had been stabbed and was bleeding out and dying. So depends on how you look at it. I think the trauma is a absolute cost that everybody has to pay, but that's up to interpretation. So, yeah, the Cosmere deities, that's gonna be a huge thing. So those are all of the costs that I have. Excuse me, 1 second. Okay, and that brings us to consequences. So again, costs and consequences are very similar. Costs have to be paid before they happen before the magic is performed. Consequences happen after the magic is performed. And part of the reason that's important is it's easier to suffer non-magic related consequences than it is to have non-magic related costs. Let me explain what I mean by that. So, with the consequences in Allomancy, one of the biggest ones is that if you aren't a noble and you are caught using Allomancy, you will be hunted down and executed and tortured and probably have a hemalurgic spike driven through you by the Steel Ministry. That's what the Steel Inquisitors are for. That's what a lot of the cantons do. They have seekers to detect allomantic use so they can be hunted down. Is only nobles are supposed to be able to use it. So if you're not a noble and aren't fronting as a noble, then that is a potential consequence of using your magic, is being hunted down by the Steel Inquisition. And that is a societal consequence. It can also have, so that's a societal and conditional one. It's not guaranteed because, again, if you're a noble, nobody's going to bother you about it. There are negative side effects of overuse, and that is an absolute consequence. There's no real getting around that. If you overuse it, you're going to suffer at least some. How much you suffer is going to change based on what you used and how much you used it. But they even have a term for it, like pewter dragging, is if you use pewter for too long, you basically have like an intense hangover / flu symptoms. And if you use any metal excessively, you can become, I think it's a savant. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but it can start to have permanent changes on your body as if you use a metal too much. And that's true no matter what you do. There's also aspects of if you don't use it properly, like it's easy. This is another one. So this is where we go from the absolute to more conditional side of things. So the absolute is there are negative effects from overuse. The conditional one is that it is also easy to hurt yourself or push too hard, especially with certain metals like pewter and duralumin. Because if you don't use duralumin properly, like if you do an intense steel push and you're not burning pewter, you might crush all the bones in your body because you didn't reinforce your body to handle the intensity of the steel push you just did. Another thing they talk about is with pewter is, yeah, you can keep burning pewter and stay standing, but you might have suffered wounds that are bad enough that as soon as you stop burning pewter, you succumb to your injuries and die. So that's a situation where it's easy to overdo it and push too hard and not be aware of what is happening. So it's also not necessarily true for all of them, but even if you're looking at steel pushing and iron pulling, if you don't have steel and you pull on something too hard, you might effectively shoot yourself, because they use coins and small metal objects as bullets effectively because they can launch it with enough force. And if you're doing pulling and you just yank on a nail, you might just shoot yourself with a nail. You know, um, one that is specific but is also an absolute vulnerability is with tin. Because you are enhancing your senses, it makes you vulnerable to overstimulation and loud noises. So that's another consequence of burning the metal. You have to be aware of being overstimulated by sound or light, or even pain. And they talk about that there in the book, where one of the most important parts of using tin effectively is learning how to ignore some of the sensory input. That brings us to the final C, which are countermeasures. Now, countermeasures are usually, I'm not even going to say that. These are conditional, because the countermeasures that we have here are the haze killers and custom built weapons, really. So there's metal free weapons, so using glass daggers and using stone arrowheads are the most common one, because allomancers can't push those away. So you shoot a stone-headed arrow at them, and they're gonna get shot just like anybody else, unless they are burning pewter to dodge faster, or in most cases using atium to see where the arrows are going and to just weave between them. Haze killers are especially interesting because that is a non-magical solution to a magical threat. They are soldiers that are trained to use specific types of weapons, all without metal, and trained in specific strategies to deal with allomancers. So they are squads that can come in and deal with Mistborn and coin shots and stuff like that. So those are the countermeasures that exist. Aluminum is kind of a countermeasure, but that all depends on how you want to look at it. So, all right. So I've been talking a lot, and we're only just now getting to the blueprint. So it is becoming clear to me that if I do this as a series of breakdown videos, which by the way, I would love some input and some ideas of how you would like to see all of this information broken down. Because even after editing, this is probably going to be like a 40-minute video. And maybe that's what you guys want, is you end up with like 4 potentially very long videos for each of the different parts of the deep dive into the magic system. I don't know. But from there, we have the blueprint. And again, I had to delete and change and reinstall a bunch of stuff on my computer, which is part of the problem I have here. So I don't have the blueprint available to share on screen. Best I can do is show it here. And hopefully you can see all of that. And memorize it. Do it. I'm kidding. I'll show it up on occasion. Did I at least show you the right one? Yeah, I showed you the right one. Okay. So I've talked about the blueprint and the different variables in various places, so I'm not going to go into all of that in great depth. But Allomancy is one of the textbook hard rational magic systems. Most of Sanderson's stuff is textbook hard rational systems. We know the majority of the system, or at least we think we know the majority of the system, and the way it behaves is very rational. Like, the rules are very simple, and then it's about extrapolating from those rules. So again, steel lets you push metal away. And that's it. So a lot of the other stuff, including the countermeasures and the various uses of steel pushing, all come down to exploration of that basic concept. So highly rational, very hard magic system. In terms of transference, transference is very low because, with the exception of the Mist and Lerasium, you were born with it or you're not, and that's it. Full stop. There's no changing that. Not within Allomancy. Hemalurgy is a different thing, but not within Allomancy. Allomancy transference is very low. Prevalence is fairly low. It's only in the nobles, and the nobles are are a relatively small. They are not the they are the minority of the population for sure. Don't know how many there are compared to the Ska, but they are definitely the minority. And among the nobles, Mistings and Mistborn are an exception. They are a nice to have that if you have them can make your house very powerful. Mistborn are very rare. So each one we go up, the prevalence goes lower and lower. It seems like it's really high because the entire book focuses around these magic users, but that's more of a perspective thing than an actual world thing. Then for source, the source I argue is external and it is renewable. So the power to perform the magic comes from the metals. The ability to burn them is inherent, but the actual power to fuse the magical effects is in the metals, which is why you have to consume and burn them to get the magic effect. You don't have metal, you can't do it unless you're doing the weird use of the mist thing that not everybody can do. And in terms of renewable, I have it stated as renewable because if the amount in your stomach runs out, you just down another flask with metal in it and you're good to go and do it some more. We can argue and debate as to whether it's renewable on like a global scale, but we don't have enough information about that. And we do know that atium does grow back. So the other metals in Scadrial might grow back as well. We don't know. But on a personal level, it is in fact renewable. Flux is neutral or maybe slightly negative, depending on how you want to look at it. Over the course of the series, it's pretty much neutral. The amount of magic in the world isn't really decreasing. Yeah, you're killing people off, but new people are being born with it all the time, and it's not that the magic system is decreasing as much as the people with access to it are decreasing, which, again, that depends on how you want to look at it. You could say that the flux is negative because over time the potency is decreasing, but that's up to your interpretation. And all of the stuff that I talk about here, all of this is subjective, and all of this is to help you understand and do what you need to do and want to do with your magic system. It's not me trying to create some gospel or definitive stance on anything. That's just not how I roll. Naturalness is medium because it feels like part of the world, but it's also well outside of what we see anywhere else in the world. Any place that we see this kind of stuff is related to the magic. There's not stuff where the magic is deeply connected to the world itself. Feruchemy is a little more natural, which I can do a different set of videos about that, but because that's relating to your own attributes and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's medium or maybe medium high. Now with ease of use, I have that put at medium low, simply because of how important skill is to using the magic safely and effectively. Is anybody can use it. Anybody who's an allomancer, you can consume the metals and you can use it. But using it safely and effectively requires training and requires skill, which actually drops down the ease of use a significant bit given how important the skill is in this system. Reliability is maxed out. It's extremely high. The magic always does the same thing, whoever it is. And whenever you use it, it does the same thing. It performs the same way. It is reliable. It is repeatable. And that ties into the rational. Finally, we have the consistency. Consistency is also high because all of these things that we've looked at, there aren't really any exceptions to anything I've talked about. So all of this stuff of like transference being low, the number of exceptions are exceedingly rare for any of the things we're talking about. Any of the deviations from what we've talked about are exceedingly small. So it is highly internally consistent in terms of how the different stuff operates. So that is me just blitzing through the blueprint and the variables. But I wanted to get through that because the next thing I want to talk about is last time, we talked about how whether the magic system functions as magic or technology and application, and I want to make that part of this discussion of what the magic system is and what it does. So does Allomancy function as magic or does it function as tech? Well, let's go through it a bit at a time. There's a couple of settings that are generally important for determining that, being source, flux, ease of use, reliability, and transference. Technology, it's easier for it to function as technology if source is external. Flux is positive, ease of use is high, reliability is high, and transference is high. Now, about half of those are high with Allomancy. With Allomancy, reliability is high and source is external. Flux is neutral, which can function, but it's neutral. Ease of use is low, and transference is low. So that's making it lean more towards magic and application. But if we look at the impact of things, so what scale can it impact the world around it? That is incredibly individual. Because transference is so low, it's going to be limited to what individual people can do and not necessarily shape what society can do as a whole. Now, when we look at the source, it is external and it originates from the world, which because it originates from the world, that is another thing that can lend it towards technology, but only if some other things are in place. So the convenient, that's part of the ease of use and transference and reliability. So you're absolutely right, Lucas. How formalized is it? It's not very formalized. Like people know what it is, but most of the information is relatively qualitative in comparison. As we know, if one person is more powerful by another simply by pitting them against each other. Now, it could become quantitative if people cared to make it so, but not in every aspect. Because how would you quantify the emotional manipulation? How would you say, oh, they decreased my anger by 6 lumens or therms? Like, I don't know how you would quantify that. Now they could develop a system to quantify that, and then it would be more formalized and more structured. But at the moment, it's very qualitative. Then there's reproduction and scope of production. Reproduction is no, not easily. You can only do it with Lerasium and the Mist, and those don't seem to be things that they can harvest the way that they can with Atium, or at least they don't know how. If they can, they don't know how. So all of these things put Allomancy definitively functioning as magic, but with the potential to be used as tech if a few things change, which they do over the course of the second trilogy, which big part of the reason I wanted to break that up, because in the second trilogy, they find some ways to bump up the transference, and there's an entire civilization that is using Allomancy as a rudimentary form. Well, not even a rudimentary, as a form of magic tech. Even then, it's not true tech. They have to use it as magic tech. But that doesn't exist in the first trilogy. Okay. This is exactly what I thought. I was writing it up and I said, yeah, this seems like a lot. And it was, in fact, a lot. So that is one of the 4 parts I want to do in these kinds of intense breakdowns. So next month, I'll probably do Allomancy again, but dig into how it was used, both in the story and how Sanderson used it for a variety of connecting it to a story and in different sorts of story and plot devices. That's what I'm going to get into with that next one. So, with all of that, I'm gonna pause for a second and get some Kleenex because naturally my nose has been itching this whole time. I have been doing my best not to scratch it, but it doesn't matter. My nose is gonna itch when I record. But I'm going to give you guys a chance to go ahead and post any questions you have about what I have been talking about your own system, about anything in any of my videos. So we'll move into the Q&A portion. So I will be back in 1 second. All right. I'm also going to get caught up on the chat here. Darker than black. Hey, Neil, if you're still here, where is Darker Than Black available? Is that only on Crunchyroll? Is that Netflix, Hulu? Where might we be able to access that? And I'm not really seeing any questions, so um, yeah. Uh, One other thing that I will mention, there's going to be another video. There's going to be another video coming out that's recorded the way I used to. Um, because this is very exciting, but Podium Entertainment actually reached out to see about sponsoring a video. And they did. And that is for the audiobook of He Who Fights with Monsters, Book 11. So the video that's going to be coming out is I talk a little bit about what I like about that series and that system, and then I build out a full suite of essence abilities for me. Um, Part of the reason I want to bring that up is uh, if you are on my newsletter, I'm going to be running a contest through my newsletter. I'm going to give people a chance. Once the video comes out, I'm going to give people a chance to uh, create their own essence abilities or their own kind of ability profile and send them in. And whoever has my favorite, I will buy um, whichever of whichever book in the series you need. If you haven't started the series, I'll buy you book 1. If you need book 11, I'll buy you book 11. Wherever. So whoever has my favorite is going to get a. I have to be careful how I say this. A free to them. Whoever wins is going to be gifted a one of the books from the He Who Fights with Monsters series. That's only going to be available to people on my newsletter, and you can find that just by going to my website of sierrarowanson.com. If you don't get the newsletter, ping me, leave a comment on here, and actually, I can go try and find the link. Here we go. This is a link, and I'm going to be doing some overhauls of my newsletter in the future to make it more just more. I want to make it more enticing for people to be part of it. Uh, I want to have more cohesive theme and all of that kind of stuff. So that contest, I'm probably going to be letting people know about that at the end of the month. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. So I can tell you guys a little bit about what's been going on in my life, and then we'll wrap it up. I think it's saying there's only like 4 of you guys left, and I appreciate all of you coming here and sticking around. Very much appreciate that. So on my end, things have been going good. Again, you will get more news on my newsletter. Surprise, surprise. But I have been working on a secret project for over a year now, and I'm finally at the stage that I am allowed to start giving teaser information about that project. And the project is that I am a co-author on a lit RPG series that we have been working on. It's slated to be a trilogy, and book one recently got handed into the beta readers. It may be a while before it actually gets published because I think they're going to want to do rapid release. Uh, Frickin' dog hair never fails. I think they're going to want to do rapid release, so they won't actually publish book one until we're further along through the trilogy. But pre-order might go up soon, so we'll see. But yeah, I am co-authoring a lit RPG series. Oh, that is something about gifting the book. I'm glad you mentioned something, Lionel. That is likely just going to be limited to people in America. And I think probably Canada, excluding Quebec. I'm going to have to stick to America most likely because Audible can get very weird about that. Like they don't want you gifting outside of your zones. So if I'm using Audible, basically I can only give it to people who are using audible.com, not audible.de or audible.eu or anything like that. So but yes, contest coming up on the newsletter, lit RPG series that I have been working on. Book one is done. Yeah, and part of the reason I wanted to bring that up is the He Who Fights with Monsters video. He Who Fights with Monsters and City of Mist were huge sources of inspiration for the magic system that I built. Like I helped with a lot of different stuff in the book, but part of the reason I was brought in as one of the collaborating authors is because of my experience with magic and my experience with lit RPG. So I did a lot of the initial lit RPG and magic system design, and then we bounced it around and got things adjusted. But huge sources of inspiration for that were He Who Fights with Monsters and the tabletop RPG of City of Mist. So that's what I've been up to. Yeah, so it's exciting. I'm now doing the writing full time, which has been huge. It has been really huge not having to deal with some of the stress and frustration that I was having to deal with the day job, and being able to focus so heavily on the writing has been fantastic. Also, I have weekends to myself for the first time in like 15 to 16 years. um, I don't have to work on the weekends unless I'm doing something like this, which I'm mostly doing on the weekends because that seems to be when more of you guys are available, and I want to do it when the most people are available. So, um, yeah, I guess that's all I got. But you can look forward to more information, little bits of information about uh, the book I'm a co-author on, which is very exciting. It'll be my first fiction book published. Um, yeah, and probably what I'm gonna do, I'm getting ahead of myself, but when we actually get to the launch date, I'll probably do a launch party live stream where I get real nerdy with how the magic system works and share the details with you guys on that. So that's something to look forward to. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Your support continues to be incredible, and just the community and attitude that we have is amazing, and I really appreciate all of you guys. So until next time, um, take the huge amount of information that I've dumped in your laps, think on it, but just make sure that you keep writing and you stay awesome. All right, I will catch you guys later as soon as I figure out how to end the stream. Here we go. Bye, guys.